The rain had just stopped in Manhattan, leaving the streets glistening like polished glass beneath the city lights. Skyscrapers stood proud against the fading twilight, while the buzz of taxis and the hum of hurried footsteps gave the night its restless pulse. In the corner of Fifth Avenue, tucked between a bookstore and a boutique, a quaint café named Haven's Corner breathed warmth into the chilly evening. Its golden glow spilled through tall windows, drawing strangers in like moths to a flame. Inside, the air smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans, vanilla, and the sweetness of freshly baked pastries. A gentle jazz tune played in the background, making conversations sound softer and secrets feel safer. The cafe wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. Students buried in laptops, couples whispering over shared desserts, and lone dreamers lost in thought. Among them sat Audrey Wright, her posture elegant yet unassuming. Her dark curls framed a face that was striking in its natural beauty. High cheekbones, soft brown skin, and eyes that carried fire and vulnerability. She wore a simple navy dress, modest but graceful, paired with a silver bracelet that shimmered faintly under the warm lights. Audrey wasn't the type of woman who sought attention, yet the very act of her being made it impossible not to notice her. She glanced at the time on her phone and sighed. Another blind date. Her best friend had insisted she give this one a chance. Supposedly the man was responsible, stable, and looking for something serious. Audrey didn't expect much. In her experience, serious often meant controlling, and responsible was usually a thin disguise for boring. Still, a part of her longed for something real, a family, a partner who wouldn't treat her like an option. She took another sip of her latte, convincing herself that tonight would be no different. On the opposite side of the city, Stephen Hall adjusted his collar in the reflection of a rain-slicked window. He wasn't supposed to be nervous. He was, after all, the man who built Hall Group into one of the most potent investment empires in New York. To the world, he was ruthless, untouchable, a billionaire whose decisions could make or break markets. Yet dressed in a plain black jacket and jeans, he looked more like a bodyguard than the titan he was. By his side, two little boys tugged at his hands, their laughter cutting through the night like bells. Ethan and Mason, both 7, identical in their mischievous smiles, similar in how their bright blue eyes mirrored Stephen's. They shouldn't have been here. Blind dates weren't the kind of place for children, but the twins had insisted. "Dad," Ethan said seriously, his tiny voice carrying the kind of authority that only children dared to wield, "if you don't find us a mom tonight, Mason and I will." Mason nodded, his face deadpan, though a playful spark danced in his eyes. "Yeah, we're tired of just you. We want someone to tell us bedtime stories, someone who bakes cookies, not burnt toast." Stephen chuckled, though a pang of guilt touched him. He tried. Oh, he tried. But there were things only a mother could give. And their mother? No. That chapter of his life was a wound he kept sealed. He squeezed their hands tighter, as if holding on to them was enough to silence the ghosts of his past. "Fine," he said, his voice low, half amused. "But remember, you two promised no mischief tonight. This is just a meeting. Nothing more." The boys exchanged a look, the kind that spelled trouble. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and Audrey looked up just in time to see 3 figures step inside, a tall man with shoulders broad enough to eclipse the light behind him, and 2 boys whose giggles filled the cozy space. The man scanned the room with an alertness that seemed trained, almost as though he were used to scanning for danger. His jaw was sharp, his eyes steel gray, and even though he was dressed so plainly, he carried himself with a quiet authority. Audrey's breath caught, though she quickly told herself it was only surprise. "Is this him?" The boys spotted her first. Mason pointed, whispering loudly enough for the entire cafe to hear. "That's her. That's the one we saw in Dad's dream." Audrey blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" The taller boy. Ethan didn't hesitate. He rushed over, grabbed her hand with surprising warmth and declared, "You're our mom now." The cafe went quiet. Several heads turned. Audrey flushed crimson. Stephen hurried over his ears, tinged pink with embarrassment. "Ethan Mason," he said firmly, though his voice betrayed amusement. "That's not how introductions work." Audrey tried to free her hand, but Ethan clung tighter, his eyes wide with a strange recognition, as if he genuinely believed the words he'd just said. Mason wrapped himself around Audrey's other arm, not wanting to be left out. Audrey laughed for the first time in years, an unguarded, genuine laugh that startled even herself. "I've been called many things," she said softly, looking at the man standing before her, "but never Mom on a first date." Stephen rubbed the back of his neck, looking almost shy. "They can be a little forward." "A little." Audrey arched a brow. The twins grinned unrepentant. They sat together at a corner table, the boys in between them, like unofficial chaperones. Conversation flowed awkwardly at first, Audrey asking the usual questions about work, Stephen dodging with vague answers. "I'm just a bodyguard," he said when she pressed. Something about the way he said it didn't feel right. His hands, though calloused, bore no scars of violence. His tone was too practiced, too deliberately plain. Audrey knew the sound of someone hiding behind words. "You don't look like a bodyguard," she replied casually. "Why not?" "Because," she said, tilting her head, "you sit like a man used to giving orders, not taking them." Stephen's eyes flickered, but he smiled faintly. "You read people well." Audrey smiled back, though something unsettled her. Why would a man like him pretend to be less than he was? Before she could think further, Ethan interrupted. "Do you like Dad?" Audrey nearly choked on her latte. "What?" Mason leaned in, whispering loudly. "He's strong. He cooks spaghetti, bad spaghetti, but still. And he reads us stories. Well, sort of. More like he falls asleep halfway, but we love him." "Boys," Stephen began, but Audrey laughed again, tightening his chest. "Slow down," she said, gently ruffling their hair. "We've only just met." But the warmth in her eyes betrayed something else. Hours slipped by unnoticed. They talked about small things, books, movies, the absurdity of New York rent prices. The boys told embarrassing stories about their father, and Stephen pretended not to mind. For the first time in a long time, he felt normal. Not a billionaire hiding in plain sight. Not a widower haunted by the past. Just a man sitting across from a woman who made the world feel softer. Yet, as they prepared to leave, a shadow crossed the threshold of the cafe. Richard Cooper's sharp suit, sharper tongue, and eyes full of disdain approached their table. "Well, well," Richard sneered, "if it isn't Audrey Wright. You've downgraded to dating men who can't afford a proper babysitter." Stephen stiffened, his eyes narrowing, but he said nothing. Audrey's jaw tightened. "Richard, not tonight." Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough for menace to slip through. "You deserve better than this, a man with nothing. No house. No car. Nothing to offer you but baggage." His eyes flicked to the boys with cruel amusement. "Double baggage, actually." Audrey opened her mouth to retort, but Stephen stood first. His height cast Richard in shadow, and for the briefest second, there was nothing poor or ordinary about him. His presence filled the room like thunder. "Say another word about my sons," Stephen said quietly, "and you'll regret it." The cafe stilled. Even Richard faltered just for a moment before scoffing. "Protective. Cute. But you can't protect her from reality." He smirked at Audrey. "You'll see soon enough." He walked away, leaving tension hanging in the air. Audrey exhaled slowly. "Friends of yours." Stephen's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Not exactly. The twins clung to Audrey, sensing her unease. She stroked their hair absent-mindedly, but her gaze lingered on Stephen. There was something about him, something unspoken, something powerful. He was hiding behind the mask of a humble bodyguard. And deep down, Audrey knew this night was only the beginning of something much bigger. When she finally left the café, the city lights seemed brighter, and the night air was sharper. Audrey walked down Fifth Avenue, her thoughts tangled. She had told herself this was just another blind date, another evening to cross off the list. But the way Ethan and Mason had clung to her and Stephen's eyes had softened when she laughed. And that moment, just a flicker, when he stood against Richard, and the entire café seemed to bow to his presence. That wasn't the posture of a bodyguard. That was something else, something dangerous, something magnetic. Audrey didn't know what it was yet, but one thing was sure. Stephen Hall was no ordinary man, and her life, as carefully guarded as it had been, was about to unravel in ways she couldn't imagine. Morning sunlight spilled over Manhattan, like liquid gold glinting off glass towers and washing the city in a soft glow. For most, Monday meant routine crowded subways, coffee-fueled commutes, and endless hours under fluorescent lights. But for Audrey Wright, this morning felt different. She had agreed against every bit of her cautious nature to see Stephen again. She told herself it was to humor the twins, who had begged in their mischievous way. "You're already like our mom," Ethan had declared. "At least come for pancakes." She smiled now at the memory, adjusting the strap of her handbag as she walked down a quieter street in Brooklyn Heights. The neighborhood carried a charm Manhattan couldn't replicate: red brick townhouses, leafy sidewalks, and a slower rhythm. At the corner cafe, the scent of butter and maple syrup welcomed her. And there they were, Stephen, seated by the window, the twins on either side of him, their small hands sticky with syrup. For a moment, Audrey watched. He wasn't looking at his phone or staring absently out the window. He laughed genuinely and freely as Mason smeared whipped cream across Ethan's cheek. The laughter softened his sharp features and made him look less like a man with hidden walls and more like a father. And that, she realized, was the first thing about him that made her heart stumble. Over here, Ethan spotted her first, his blue eyes bright as a spark. Mason followed with an enthusiastic wave, nearly knocking over his orange juice. "We saved you a seat, Audrey." Stephen rose politely, pulling the chair beside him. "Good morning," he said, his voice low, but carrying a warmth that hadn't been there the night before. Audrey sat smoothing her dress. "Good morning. I see your sons are excellent hosts. They take after their father." Stephen replied, a touch of humor in his tone. Audrey arched a brow. "So you admit it?" "Admit what?" "That you've raised them well." Something flickered in his expression, pride softened by regret. "I've tried." The conversation moved easily, carried by the twins' chatter. They asked Audrey questions no adult would dare. What was her favorite color? Did she sing in the shower? Did she believe in Santa Claus? She answered with patience, sometimes laughing, deflecting. But what struck her most wasn't the boy's innocence, but Stephen's watchfulness. He listened to every word, his gaze steady, as if memorizing how she responded. It wasn't just politeness. It was almost searching. When the twins ran off to inspect the pastry counter, Audrey leaned in slightly. "Stephen, can you tell me something?" He didn't flinch, but she saw his shoulders tighten. "Go on. Why do you insist on calling yourself a bodyguard?" His lips curved faintly, as though he had expected the question. "Because that's what I am." Audrey tilted her head. "And yet the way you carry yourself says otherwise. Most men don't scan the room 3 times before sitting down. Most don't choose a seat with a clear view of every exit. And most don't speak with that kind of restraint, unless they're used to holding power. Stephen met her gaze, his steel gray eyes unreadable. You read too much into people. Or perhaps she countered softly, you're not saying enough. Before he could respond, Richard's voice sliced through the moment. Well, well, look who's playing house. Audrey turned sharply. Richard stood at the entrance, flanked by two colleagues, his suit tailored to perfection, his smirk dripping arrogance. He walked over, ignoring the tension that immediately settled at the table. Breakfast with the help. Richard sneered at Stephen. Audrey, your standards were modest, but this is almost tragic. Stephen's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. Audrey, however, did. Richard, go. Not until you see reason, he pressed. You deserve someone who can offer stability, wealth security, not a man with two mouths to feed and nothing to his name. The words stung, not because Audrey believed them, but because they echoed the insecurities she hadn't dared to voice. She glanced at Stephen, but his face was carved in silence unreadable. Richard leaned closer, lowering his tone. One day, you'll realize you're wasting your time. And when that day comes, don't expect me to wait forever. With that, he turned and strode out, leaving a silence heavy enough to crush. The twins returned, oblivious, carrying muffins too large for their hands. What happened? Mason asked through a mouthful. Nothing important, Stephen said smoothly, though his eyes lingered on Audrey. But Audrey wasn't so easily pacified. Her mind spun with Richard's venomous words. Nothing to his name. The plain jacket, the modest apartment address Stephen had scribbled for her, and the lack of detail about his work suddenly weighed heavily. Was Richard right? Or was Stephen hiding something far greater than she imagined? Later that afternoon, Audrey found herself walking the streets of Soho, thoughts restless. She had planned to stop by her jewelry shop, a modest boutique she'd built with stubborn determination. But her mind replayed the morning. Stephen's silences, Richard's taunts, the boy's innocent insistence that she was already their mother. She paused before her shop window, staring at the delicate rings and pendants displayed under soft light. She had built this life brick by brick, refusing to depend on anyone. And yet, for the first time, she wondered what it would mean to let someone else in. Her phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. Be careful with him. He isn't who you think. Audrey's breath caught. She looked around instinctively, the crowd suddenly pressing closer. Who had sent this, and who were they talking about? Meanwhile, Stephen stood before a glass wall in a skyscraper overlooking the Hudson Manhattan, sprawling beneath him. The mask of the bodyguard was gone. In its place stood the man the world admired and feared, Stephen Hall, CEO of Hall Group. His assistant Daniel Miller approached cautiously. Sir, the board is asking about your absence. They're concerned about appearances. Stephen's eyes remained fixed on the city. Let them be concerned. May I ask, is this about the woman? Stephen turned then, and for the first time in years, Daniel saw hesitation in his friend's face. She's different. The boys, they see her as their mother already. And you? Stephen didn't answer. But his silence was louder than any confession. That evening, Audrey received another message. He'll break you, Audrey, just like the last one. Her hand trembled as she set down the phone. She didn't know who was sending these warnings. She didn't even know if they were lies or truths. But one thing she knew with startling clarity: Stephen Hall was a man surrounded by shadows. And whether she walked toward him or away, her life was no longer safe from the storm he carried. The air was heavy with summer warmth, which lingered even after sunset, wrapping Brooklyn Heights in a quiet hush. Audrey paused at the stoop of a brownstone building, her heart skipping unreasonably as she glanced at the handwritten note Stephen had given her, Apartment 3C. This is ridiculous, she told herself. It's just dinner. And yet, her pulse betrayed her. She climbed the steps, the hum of cicadas filling the silence, and knocked gently. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Mason's face lit with unfiltered delight. "You came," he exclaimed, tugging her inside with a strength no 7-year-old should have. "Dad said you might be busy, but I knew you'd come." "Of course I came," Audrey laughed, steadying herself as Ethan appeared, his grin matching his brother's. "What's all this excitement for spaghetti night?" Ethan said solemnly, as though announcing a royal banquet. "But don't worry, Dad only burned the sauce a little." Audrey stifled another laugh, but her amusement softened when her eyes lifted and met Stephen's. He stood by the small kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, forearms flexing as he stirred something in a pot. His expression was calm, but a quiet light flickered in his eyes when he saw her relief almost, or perhaps gratitude. "Welcome," he said. The apartment was modest, almost deliberately so. The furnishings were plain, the walls unadorned, save for a single bookshelf lined with children's books and a few framed landscapes. It didn't suit the man she suspected Stephen to be. It was too careful, too stripped of anything personal. Yet there was warmth in the way the boys' toys cluttered the living room, warmth in the blanket folded neatly on the couch, warmth in the scent of garlic and tomatoes that filled the air. "Can I help, Audrey?" asked, stepping toward the kitchen. Stephen glanced at her, his smile crooked. "Only if you're better at not burning sauce than I am," she teased. "I can't promise miracles," taking the spoon from him. Their hands brushed, and momentarily the world narrowed to that single point of contact. Neither spoke of it, but both felt it. Dinner was chaos. Ethan insists Audrey sit beside him. Mason tries to outdo his brother's jokes, and Stephen attempts to maintain order but fails gloriously. Audrey found herself laughing more than she had in months, her guard slipping in the warmth of this makeshift family. She cut Mason's spaghetti into smaller bites, wiped sauce from Ethan's cheek, and scolded both when they tried to sneak extra garlic bread. The ease with which she slipped into the rhythm of care startled her, but what surprised her more was how natural it felt. Stephen noticed too. His gaze lingered on her when she wasn't looking, his chest tightening at the sight. It was dangerous, as was how much space she was already taking up in their lives. Risky because secrets were fragile, and his was too large to stay hidden forever. After dinner, the boys insisted on showing Audrey their fortress, a blanket fort in the corner of the living room, adorned with flashlights and guarded by a stuffed dragon. She crawled inside with them, listening as they recited stories they'd made up about knights and princesses, and brave mothers who always came home. Her throat tightened at that last part. She hugged them closer, blinking back an ache she couldn't quite name. From the doorway, Stephen watched. The sight cut him deeper than he expected. It was everything he wanted, everything he feared: the illusion of a family whole again, and the terror of losing it, should the truth surface. Audrey rose from the fortress when the boys finally drifted to sleep, smoothing her dress. "They're good kids," she said softly. "They're my world," Stephen admitted, his voice rough. Audrey turned to him, then her eyes gentle but searching. "And their mother." A shadow crossed his face so quick she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching closely. "She's not here." It wasn't an answer. It was a wall. Audrey didn't push, though questions swirled within her. Instead, she nodded, offering a small smile. "They're lucky to have you." But she couldn't ignore how her heart twisted at the thought, because a part of her, irrational and impossible, felt connected to those boys in a way she couldn't explain. As she gathered her things to leave, her phone buzzed another message. "He lies to you. He'll ruin you like he ruins everyone." Her breath caught. She quickly locked the screen before Stephen noticed. but the words burned against her palm, a warning she couldn't shake. On her way out, she paused by the bookshelf, her fingers brushing over a framed photograph tucked between two novels. She pulled it out without thinking and froze. It was a picture of the twins as toddlers, their tiny hands clutching a woman's fingers. The woman's face was blurred, turned away from the camera, but there was something hauntingly familiar in the curve of her wrist, the way she wore a simple silver bracelet, identical to the one on Audrey's arm. Her breath faltered. The bracelet had been her mother's, passed down to her as a keepsake. She turned sharply, the photo trembling in her hand. "Stephen, who is this?" Stephen's face shifted, a crack in the mask fleeting but undeniable. "Someone from the past," he said at last, his voice low-guarded. "Someone best left there." But Audrey wasn't convinced, because deep in her chest a whisper rose, a whisper that felt dangerously close to the truth. What if the boys are mine? The morning after she visited Stephen's apartment, Audrey sat by the window of her Harlem townhouse, untouched coffee cooling beside her. Outside, the street bustled with the ordinary rhythms of New York children, chasing each other to school, a vendor arranging fresh bagels on a cart, the distant rumble of the subway below. But inside her nothing felt ordinary. Her mind replayed the image she'd found: tiny and smiling twins, clutching the hand of a woman who wore her bracelet. The same silver band her mother had pressed into her palm years ago, with a whispered, "This belonged to your grandmother. Keep it, Audrey. One day it will guide you." Had it guided her here, to Ethan Mason and Stephen Hall? A tremor of unease tightened her chest. Her phone buzzed, dragging her back. A new message glowed across the screen. "Do you really know who he is? Or who are you to him?" Audrey's breath stilled. Unlike the previous taunts, this one cut deeper, personal, intimate, almost as though the sender could read her thoughts. She shoved the phone aside, but the words lingered like a stain. That evening she met Stephen again. He'd asked her to visit Central Park, where Ethan and Mason flew kites. The late summer sun bathed the sky in amber, and laughter carried on the breeze. The sight of the boys running barefoot across the grass tugged at something fragile within Audrey. For a moment, she almost forgot her doubts and fears, and watched. "You've become a part of their world so quickly," Stephen murmured, stepping beside her. His nearness unsettled her. His scent, cedar faint cologne, wrapped around her like a secret she wanted to unravel. "They're remarkable," she said softly. "But, Stephen, I need to ask you something." He turned cautious. "Go on." Her words trembled, but she forced them out. "That photograph in your apartment, the one with the twins as toddlers. Who was the woman with them?" A shadow passed over his face. "Audrey. She wore this." Audrey lifted her wrist, the silver bracelet glinting in the fading light. "The same bracelet I'm wearing. That can't be a coincidence." For a long moment, he said nothing. His jaw tightened, eyes flickering with a storm of conflict. Finally, he exhaled, his voice low. "Some questions don't have answers you're ready for." Her heart clenched. "That's not an answer, Stephen. That's avoidance." His hand twitched as if he wanted to reach for her, but stopped himself. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" He looked away toward the boys, chasing their kites away from me. Later, after the twins had been tucked into the car, Audrey and Stephen lingered by the lake's edge. The city lights shimmered on the rippling water, casting their reflections into fragile fragments. "Why do you insist on making me feel like a stranger in something that feels familiar?" Audrey whispered, more to herself than to him. Stephen's reply was barely audible, "Because the truth could cost you everything." She turned sharply. "Or, you're afraid of losing everything if I find out." Their gazes locked, a clash of fear and yearning. The world shrank to that single electric tension between them for a suspended heartbeat. Then Stephen stepped back. "It's late. I'll drive you home." The following days unfolded like a delicate balancing act. Audrey continued to see the boys laugh with them and share meals and stories. Yet beneath every smile lay unspoken questions, every touch tinged with doubt. And Stephen, always kind, always attentive, grew more vigilant as though shadows followed him wherever he went. He never let Audrey walk home alone. He answered calls in hushed tones, stepped aside when messages arrived. His careful facade of an ordinary man raising his sons frayed at the edges, threads of his hidden life slipping through. It was during one of those evenings at a small jazz lounge in Greenwich Village, where Stephen had invited her, that the first crack widened. Audrey sat at a corner table when a man approached, nursing a glass of wine. Tall, with slicked-back hair and a polished suit that screamed wealth, he carried an aura of charm laced with menace. "Ms. Wright." His voice was smooth, his smile practiced. "Richard Langford, a business acquaintance of Stephen's." Audrey stiffened. "I don't believe we've met. Not formally. But I've heard plenty." His gaze sharpened, calculating. "Tell me, has he told you who he really is?" Her throat tightened. "I'm not sure I follow." Richard leaned closer, his tone silk over steel. "Men like Stephen Hall build empires on lies. Be careful, Ms. Wright. Sometimes the lies aren't about business. Sometimes they're about family." Before Audrey could respond, Stephen appeared, eyes dark as storm clouds. "Richard, leave." Richard smirked, lifting his hands in mock surrender. Touchy as ever. "But you should listen, Audrey. Curiosity can be dangerous." He slipped away into the crowd, leaving behind a trail of unease. Audrey turned to Stephen. "What did he mean?" "Nothing you need to worry about." His hand closed gently but firmly around hers. "Please, don't let him poison your mind." But his grip, though steady, carried the weight of desperation. That night, lying awake in her bed, Audrey stared at the ceiling, Richard's words echoing cruelly. Lies, family, dangerous curiosity. Her phone buzzed again, another message. "Truth is closer than you think. Do you want it, Audrey?" She didn't reply, but her heart whispered the answer for her yes. The next afternoon, when Stephen dropped the twins at her bookstore for a quick visit, Audrey lingered as they darted between shelves. Mason pulled down a children's book, and Ethan begged for her to read aloud. As she opened the book, her eyes caught on a date scrawled faintly on the back cover. A date from 7 years ago, circled twice in red pen. A date she remembered well. It was the day she had woken in a hospital bed, disoriented, told by doctors that a fainting spell had nearly cost her life. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? Her pulse raced. She looked at the boys, then at Stephen, waiting by the counter, and felt the weight of inevitability. She could no longer ignore the pieces aligning the threads, tugging her toward a hidden past. If Stephen wouldn't tell her, she would find the truth herself. That evening, as the boys kissed her goodbye, Audrey bent to their level, her voice soft but fierce. "I'll always be here for you," she promised. Ethan grinned. Mason hugged her tight, and something in her chest ached, like the promise had been carved into her soul long ago. When the door closed behind them, Audrey exhaled shakily. Then she picked up her phone, opened her contacts, and dialed a number she hadn't called in years, a friend from her nursing days who still worked at Lenox Hill Hospital. "Marjorie, it's Audrey. I need a favor. Can you check some records for me? Around the year I was admitted, 7 years ago, maternity ward." Her hand trembled as she spoke the words, because even if she wasn't ready, the truth was prepared for her. The steady hum of the subway rattled beneath Audrey's feet as she gripped the strap above her. The late afternoon rush painted every car in tired faces and restless energy, but she hardly noticed. Her heart was a wild drum in her chest. A manila envelope lay in her bag, nestled between a scarf and her notebook. She had just picked it up from Marjorie at Lenox Hill. Her friend had been hesitant. "Audrey, this is sensitive, you know. If anyone finds out," but eventually handed it over with a look that said, "Be careful what you wish for." Now its weight pulled at her shoulder like an anchor. Audrey set the envelope on the table when she reached her bookstore apartment and stared at it. The boys' laughter from yesterday still lingered in her mind. Stephen's steady voice whispering, "I'm trying to protect you," still burned in her ears. Her hand trembled as she slid the papers free. Hospital records, admission logs, notes scrawled in hurried handwriting. Her eyes skimmed each line a blow. Patient Audrey Wright admitted for fainting and severe blood loss. Ward maternity. Note condition stabilized. Patient is unaware of delivery complications. Audrey's breath caught. Delivery complications. Her vision blurred. She had never been told she delivered anything. She had been told it was exhaustion, stress, nothing more. The next page sent a shiver down her spine. Infants transferred. Condition fragile. Twins. She pressed a hand to her mouth, a muffled sob escaping. Twins. Her mind spiraled to Ethan's mischievous grin. Mason's quiet thoughtfulness, the way both boys had clung to her as if they'd always known her. The silver bracelet is on her wrist, and the photograph is of Stephen's apartment. Could it be? The thought was too big, too dangerous to hold. A knock at the door startled her. She shoved the envelope back into her bag, wiping at her face before opening it. Stephen stood there, tall frame filling the doorway, his expression softened by concern. "You've been avoiding my calls," he said gently. "Are you all right?" Audrey forced a smile. "I've just been busy at the shop." His gaze lingered, as though he could see through the veneer. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, Stephen walked to the window, hands in his pockets. He looked almost weary, though his presence filled the room with a familiar steadiness. "I wanted to thank you," he began. "What have you done for Ethan and Mason? They haven't smiled this much in years." His words tugged at her heart and sharpened the questions thrumming beneath her skin. "Stephen," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I need you to be honest with me. About your past. About the boy's mother. About me." His back stiffened. Slowly he turned, his eyes shadowed. "Why now?" "Because I found something," she whispered almost against her will. "At the hospital. Records. From 7 years ago." The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, he stepped closer, his jaw tight. "You went digging. What was I supposed to do?" Audrey's voice cracked. "You leave me in the dark," Richard whispers. "Poison, and your whole life is a puzzle I can't solve." "I had to know." Stephen's hand brushed her arm, tentative pleading. "Some truths can't be undone once spoken. Then let me decide if I can bear them." For a moment it seemed he might. His lips parted, eyes raw. But then with visible effort he pulled back. "Not yet. Please trust me a little longer." Her heart fractured on those words. Trust, the one thing he kept making impossible. That night, unable to sleep, Audrey wandered to the bookstore's front window. The city glowed alive with lights and movement, but she felt still trapped. Her phone vibrated again, another message. "The twins aren't his secret. They're yours." Audrey dropped the phone as if it were on fire. Stephen invited her and the boys to a fairground in Coney Island the following weekend. The air smelled of fried dough and sea salt, the crash of waves mixing with carnival music. Ethan begged for cotton candy, and Mason wanted to ride the Ferris wheel. Audrey found herself laughing despite the storm inside her. With the boys' hands in hers, she let herself imagine it was true that she belonged to them, that this fractured picture could somehow be whole. At the top of the Ferris wheel, the city sprawled beneath them, glittering under the twilight. Stephen sat across watching her. His eyes were tender, conflicted, filled with something she couldn't name. "You're good with them," he said softly. "Better than anyone." Her chest tightened, maybe because they feel familiar. Stephen's breath caught. He looked away, jaw working. And when his gaze returned, it was fierce, almost desperate. "Promise me something, Audrey. Please don't stop being part of their lives, no matter what you find or anyone says." She blinked. "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, the wheel descended, the boys squealing with delight, and the moment slipped away. Later that night, Audrey tucked the boys into their beds back at Stephen's penthouse and noticed a photo frame on the nightstand she hadn't seen before. The picture was faded, but the bracelet on the woman's wrist gleamed unmistakably. Her own bracelet. Her hands trembled as she traced the glass. Mason stirred, half asleep. "Mommy," he mumbled. Audrey froze, heart hammering. "Shh," she soothed, brushing his hair back. "Go to sleep, sweetheart." But the word lingered in the air like a brand. Downstairs, Richard Langford was waiting. Audrey hadn't expected to see him there, casually sipping Stephen's whiskey, as though he owned the place. Stephen's expression was granite. "You're not welcome here." Richard smirked. "Relax. I only came to talk." His gaze slid to Audrey. "You've seen it, haven't you? The resemblance. The bracelet. The hospital records." Audrey's pulse raced. Stephen's voice was sharp. "Enough." But Richard only leaned back, savoring the moment. "Truth has a way of surfacing, Stephen. And when it does, she'll know you've lied all along." Audrey couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt, the floor shifting beneath her. She excused herself, muttering something about needing air, and slipped onto the balcony. The night wind stung her face, carrying the scent of the ocean far below. Behind her, voices clashed, Stephen's fury, Richard's mocking laughter. But inside her chest, the loudest sound was the echo of a child's sleepy word. "Mommy." The next morning, Audrey returned to Lenox Hill. She needed more than fragments, more than hints. She needed proof. Marjorie met her in the records room, worry etched across her features. "Audrey, I shouldn't be doing this, but here." She handed over a thin file. "This matches your admission date. The twins were transferred to a private ward. Father's name listed Stephen Hall. Mother's name unknown." Audrey's breath faltered. Her eyes dropped to the signature line. There, barely legible, was a scribbled initial AW. Her initials. Her knees nearly buckled. Marjorie steadied her. "Audrey." But Audrey shook her head, tears spilling. The truth was no longer a distant shadow. It was here, undeniable in black and white. She was their mother, and Stephen had known. That evening, when Stephen arrived at the bookstore with the boys, Audrey smiled and greeted them warmly. She couldn't let the children sense the storm yet. But when Stephen caught her gaze, her eyes no longer held softness. They had fire wounds and unrelenting pain. He flinched, as though he knew what she had discovered. For the first time since they'd met, Audrey wasn't sure if what bound them together was love or betrayal. The bookstore was quiet. After closing, the air scented faintly of old paper and lavender polish Audrey had used earlier. She stood at the counter, staring at the hospital files spread before her. The words blurred from being read too many times, but their meaning was etched into her bones. Mother unknown. Initials AW. Her initials. Her son's. The bell above the door jingled. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. She felt Stephen's presence before she heard his footsteps. Late night. His voice was low, cautious, as though testing the air before stepping into it. Audrey's fingers tightened on the edge of the counter. "We need to talk." He paused. "About what?" Her head snapped up, eyes flashing. "Don't play dumb with me, Stephen. About them. About Ethan and Mason. About me." For a heartbeat, he said nothing. But silence itself was an answer. She crossed the space between them, her voice trembling but sharp. "All this time, I thought I was helping and caring for your boys because I love them. But they're my boys, aren't they?" His jaw clenched. Her breath hitched. "Tell me the truth, please." The weight in his eyes nearly broke her. "Yes," he said at last, the word falling like a stone into the silence. "They're yours." The world tilted. Even though she had known seeing the truth spoken shattered something fragile inside her. Her hands shook. 7 years, Stephen. For 7 years I believed I lost nothing more than consciousness in that hospital. 7 years you let me grieve without knowing what I'd lost. His voice was raw. "I did it to protect you." "Protect me." She choked out a bitter laugh, escaping. "From what?" "From my own children. From the truth." He snapped at the people who would have destroyed you, then softened. "Audrey, it wasn't safe. There were forces that—" She cut him off, fury breaking through her pain. "No, don't you dare cloak lies in the name of safety. You had no right." Footsteps padded softly from the staircase. Ethan rubbed his eyes, Mason trailing behind both in pajamas. "Mom." Mason mumbled, still half asleep. Audrey froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. Stephen stepped forward, quickly crouching down to their level. "Back to bed, boys. It's late." But Ethan shook his head, glancing between the two adults. "Why are you fighting?" Audrey knelt, pulling them both close. Her voice cracked, but she forced steadiness. "We're not fighting, sweetheart. We're just figuring things out." Mason's small arms wrapped around her neck, his whisper trembling against her ear. "Please don't leave us." Her heart broke anew. "I'm not leaving," she promised, though even as she said it, she didn't know if she could stay. Stephen's gaze burned into hers over the boys' heads, a silent plea she couldn't bear to meet. When the children were settled back in bed, Audrey returned to the counter. Stephen followed his steps heavy. "She said you should have told me quieter now," though the sharp edge remained. "I wanted to 1,000 times, but every time I looked at you I thought, if she remembers, if she knows, she'll walk away from all of us." Tears stung her eyes. "And now, what do you think I'll do?" His hand reached out, trembling as it touched her wrist, the bracelet cool between them. "You'll leave, and I don't know how to stop you." The next day, Richard found her outside the shop, his smirk carefully hidden beneath false sympathy. "You look pale, Audrey," he said, voice smooth as silk. "Rough night." She stiffened. "Go away." "Ah, but I can't. You see, I warned you. I told you he was lying." He stepped closer, lowering his tone. "He's dangerous. The empire he built, the enemies he made. They're not shadows you want to live under." Her eyes narrowed. "And what?" "You're the safer choice." He smiled without warmth. "At least I don't keep your children from you." The words sliced deeper than she wanted to admit. She shoved past him, but his laughter followed, cruel and knowing. That evening, Stephen arrived at the bookstore again. His eyes were tired, his voice hoarse. "Audrey, please, we need to talk." She folded her arms. "Talk, or cover more lies with half-truths," he said. I'll give you everything. Desperation breaking through his calm exterior. Every answer. Every detail. But don't shut me out. Her throat ached. Part of her longed to believe him to fall into the safety of his arms and let the anger dissolve. But another part, raw and wounded, recoiled from the thought. I don't know if I can, she whispered. His hand hovered inches from her cheek, yearning, but not daring. Then, let me prove it. Let me show you the life we could have. The four of us. Together. Her tears spilled at last. You broke me, Stephen, and I don't know if love can fix that. Ethan's laughter drifted faintly from outside Mason's voice, chiming after. They were playing in the courtyard, oblivious to the storm brewing inside. Audrey's heart twisted. For them, she wanted to stay. For herself, she tried to run. And for Stephen, she didn't know. Good night, she said finally, stepping back. Stephen's face crumpled, but he didn't stop her as she walked past. The door closed softly behind her, but the sound reverberated like thunder. On the other side, Audrey leaned against the cool brick wall, her breath ragged. Her phone buzzed again, a new message lighting the screen. Now you know. The question is, what will you do with it? She wiped her tears, squared her shoulders, and looked at the city lights. The truth was hers at last. But so was the burden. Chicago's skyline glittered against the lake, sharp and commanding, a city with ambition in its bones. Audrey pressed her forehead lightly to the cool glass of the hotel window, watching the lights ripple across Lake Michigan. It should have felt exhilarating, her first time competing in the National Jewelry Design Exhibition, a dream she had once believed too distant to touch. But instead, it felt heavy. The weight of absence pressed into her chest. Ethan's sleepy mommy, don't go, whispered in her ear. Mason's stubborn hug that had nearly unraveled her resolve, and Stephen's gaze, pleading, wounded, relentless. She had left anyway. The next morning, the exhibition hall pulsed with energy. Rows of displays sparkled under spotlights, gemstones catching and fracturing light like fragments of stars. Designers from across the country milled about, voices, low eyes sharp with competition. Audrey adjusted the display of her centerpiece, a ring of delicate design shaped as if two hands met in eternal clasp, the band adorned with tiny sapphires like scattered midnight. It was her mother's story, her own story. Loss, love, endurance. Beautiful work, a voice murmured behind her. She turned, expecting a fellow competitor, but froze. Richard Langford stood there, his smile too polished, his presence too close. What are you doing here? Audrey's voice was ice. Supporting talent, he said smoothly. Chicago's a long way from home. You might appreciate a friendly face. I'd hardly call yours friendly. His chuckle was low, sharp as ever. But tell me, has Stephen told you everything yet? Or is he still feeding you half-truths while hiding behind noble intentions? Audrey stiffened. I'm not interested in your games. Oh, but you're already in them, Richard whispered, leaning closer. The question is, will you play to win or let him ruin you, like he ruins everyone who touches him? Before she could respond, the announcement for judging rang out, pulling her back to her station. Richard's words clung like smoke. Meanwhile, Stephen paced the length of his office in New York, the city stretching below him like a restless beast. Daniel Miller, his longtime confidant, stood nearby, arms crossed. You let her go alone, Daniel demanded. Stephen rubbed his temples. She doesn't want me there. She barely wants to see me. Daniel's brow furrowed. And you think Richard won't exploit that? He's already moving pieces. If you won't protect her as a lover, then do it as the mother of your children. Stephen's chest tightened. He knew Daniel was right. His enemies weren't shadows anymore. They had faces, names, ambitions that had nothing to do with jewelry and everything to do with dismantling him. And Audrey was caught in the crossfire. "I'll handle it," Stephen said finally, his voice steel. Back in Chicago, the judging began. Audrey stood tall, listening as the panel admired her work. Words like elegant, innovative, and deeply personal drifted to her ears, though her heartbeat nearly drowned them out. But then a hush fell. One of the judges frowned, lifting a second piece from her display, a necklace she hadn't created. The chain was gaudy, and the gemstones were poorly set. "This doesn't match your style," the judge said, suspicion in his tone. "And the craftsmanship is questionable." Audrey's stomach dropped. She hadn't placed that necklace there. Her eyes darted through the crowd and found Richard watching from the corner, his smirk razor-sharp. "I didn't design that," Audrey said firmly. "It isn't mine." But whispers rippled through the hall, eyes narrowing, reputations weighing her down before she could defend herself. That night, alone in her hotel room, Audrey sat on the bed, head in her hands. She had worked for years to build credibility and be seen as a shop owner from Harlem and a designer with vision. And in one moment, Richard had tarnished it. Her phone buzzed. A message. "You see now. He can't protect you. Not here. Not anywhere." Audrey's blood chilled. Meanwhile, Stephen's plane cut through the night sky, New York fading behind him. He had tried to respect her distance, wanted to believe she was safer apart from him. But when Daniel handed him proof that Richard had flown to Chicago, all restraint dissolved. As the city of Chicago rose beneath him, Stephen's resolve hardened. He had already lost too much. He would not lose Audrey, not to Lie's enemies or the past. The exhibition hall brimmed again with anticipation the following day, this time for the public showcase. Audrey arrived earlier, determined to stand tall despite the humiliation. She placed her original ring front and center, polishing it until it gleamed like captured dawn. But as the crowd gathered, murmurs swelled. Someone had circulated photos of the fraudulent necklace and attached her name. Her cheeks burned under the weight of judgment. Then a voice cut through the din, firm, commanding. "Enough." Heads turned. Stephen Hall strode into the hall, flanked by Daniel. His presence instantly shifted the atmosphere, as though the air recognized him. No plain jacket, no humble disguise. This was Stephen unveiled, the man who owned boardrooms and silenced rivals with a glance. Audrey's breath caught. She had never seen him like this. Stephen said, "Ms. Wright's reputation is not for you to toy with," his voice resonant, directed at the judges and the murmuring crowd. "Anyone who knows design knows that piece wasn't hers. This is her work, refined, resilient, actual." He gestured to her ring, his eyes locking like hers. The judges exchanged uncertain glances. The crowd quieted. Richard stepped forward, feigning innocence. "Bold words, Stephen. But this isn't your stage." "No," Stephen agreed, stepping closer. "It's hers, and you've tried to steal it." The tension crackled, two forces colliding. Audrey stood frozen, torn between gratitude and fury. He had defended her, but also revealed himself in a way she hadn't asked for, thrusting her further into a world of power and shadows she still didn't fully understand. When the showcase ended, she found him waiting outside the city wind, tangling his hair, his suit immaculate against the night. "You shouldn't have come," she said, though her voice faltered. "I had to," he replied. "I couldn't let him hurt you." Her eyes filled with tears from relief and the ache of everything unsaid. "Stephen, I don't know how to forgive you. I don't even know if I can." He stepped closer, his hand hovering near her cheek, trembling with restraint. "Then, let me spend every day proving you can." Her breath shuddered. The distance between them was a knife-sharp, unyielding, and before either could close it, her phone buzzed again. Another message. Next time it won't just be your name I ruin. It'll be you. Audrey's heart lurched. She looked up at Stephen, fear and defiance battling in her eyes. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The train ride back from Chicago should have been peaceful. The rhythmic clatter of wheels against steel. The sweep of countryside blurring past the anonymity of strangers sharing a journey. But Audrey sat stiff-backed, fingers twisting in her lap, her phone still glowing with the last message. Next time it won't just be your name I ruin. It'll be you. Her reflection in the window looked unfamiliar. Eyes shadowed, lips pressed tight. A woman balanced between fear and defiance. She should have felt safer with Stephen, only a few seats away, the twins leaning against him, dozing as children do after excitement. Yet, safety had become an illusion, a thread unraveling at the edges. Back in New York, the city welcomed them with its usual roar taxis, sirens chatter spilling into the night. Stephen ushered the boys into the waiting car, his movements taut with caution. "Come with us tonight," he said quietly, opening the door for her. Audrey shook her head. "I need time, Stephen. Time to think." His eyes darkened, but he didn't argue. "At least let me send someone to watch the shop." "No." Her voice was firm, though her pulse betrayed her. "If I let you wrap me in guards and secrets, I'll never know if I'm living freely or under your shadow." His jaw worked, but he respected her choice. She watched the car disappear into the stream of traffic, the twins' sleepy faces pressed to the glass, and her chest ached with something more profound than longing. The bookstore was quiet that night, and the silence was almost too perfect. Audrey lingered in the back room, sorting through jewelry sketches, forcing her mind to focus. Yet unease clung to her, the sense of being watched creeping beneath her skin. The bell above the front door jingled. She stepped out expecting a late customer. Instead, two men in dark coats stood there, their faces unfamiliar, their posture wrong. "Ms. Wright," one asked, his smile thin. Her heart slammed. "We're closed." The second man moved faster than her words, grabbing her wrist, yanking her forward. She struggled, but the first pressed something sharp against her side. "Quiet," he hissed. Her scream died in her throat. The last thing she saw was the overturned sketches scattering across the floor, before the world narrowed into the suffocating dark of a waiting van. Stephen's phone rang just past midnight. He was in his penthouse, pacing, unable to sleep, every nerve wired with restless energy. When the call came, he knew before answering. Mr. Hall Daniels' voice was tight. "It's Audrey. She's gone." Stephen's vision tunneled. "What do you mean, gone?" The shop was ransacked. Witnesses saw two men forcing a woman into a van. No plates. No trace. The phone cracked under the force of Stephen's grip. Richard. It had Richard's signature all over it. And if Richard had her... Stephen's chest constricted, his world narrowing to one brutal clarity. He would burn every empire he had built if it meant bringing her back. Audrey woke to damp concrete, the air stinking of mildew and oil. A single bulb flickered overhead, throwing cruel shadows against the walls. Her wrists were bound, her bracelet glinting faintly under the harsh light. She tested the ropes too tight. Her throat ached from holding back panic, but she breathed steadily. Panic wouldn't save her. The door creaked. Richard entered, his suit immaculate, his smirk practiced as ever. He said lightly that you shouldn't look so surprised, as if this were an ordinary meeting. "I warned you, didn't I? Curiosity is dangerous." Audrey lifted her chin, forcing steel into her voice. "You're a coward. You hide behind threats and shadows because you can't stand beside Stephen in the light." His smile faltered, then hardened. "Stephen Hall ruins everything he touches. Businesses, families, Women. Do you think you're special? Do you think you'll be different? Her pulse raced, but she met his gaze without flinching. I know I'm different because I'm not afraid of the truth. His laughter echoed coldly. Brave words, Ms. Wright. Let's see how long your bravery lasts. Meanwhile, Stephen convened his closest allies in the penthouse. Daniel, a team of private operatives, men who owed him loyalty beyond contracts. Maps and photos spread across the table. Intelligence threads pulled together in frantic urgency. They've taken her, Stephen said, his voice low but lethal. I don't care what it costs. We find her. Now. Daniel studied him, concern threading through his resolve. Stephen, are you sure this is just about Richard? Others would hurt you through her. Stephen's fists clenched. I don't care who's behind it. If anyone lays a hand on her, they'll regret it. For a moment, the mask of CEO of Billionaire strategist fell away, and what remained was a man stripped bare by love and fear. Back in the warehouse, time dripped like poison. Audrey's wrists ached, her throat raw from dryness. Yet her mind spun not with fear, but with fragments of memory. The hospital bed, the silver bracelet, the boy's laughter calling her mommy. Her sons, her strength. She would not break. When the guard left his post for a cigarette, she scanned the floor, spotted a shard of broken glass glinting near the wall. Inch by inch, she edged closer, her fingers straining. The rope cut into her skin, but the thought of Ethan and Mason's faces drove her on. She grasped the shard, just as the door banged open again. Richard's silhouette filled the frame, his smile sharp. Still fighting. Good. It makes the fall that much sweeter. Audrey hid the shard beneath her palm, her voice steady. You'll regret underestimating me. At dawn, Stephen's convoy pulled into the shadow of the Hudson docks. Intelligence had led them here, whispers of a van sightings of Richard's men. Stephen stepped out dressed in black, eyes burning with fury contained by precision. Daniel moved beside him, murmuring strategy. But Stephen's focus was singular, Audrey. He would not fail her. Richard leaned casually against a pillar inside the warehouse, watching Audrey struggle with the ropes. You know, he mused, Stephen could end this. All he has to do is step down and hand me what should have been mine. And you, dear Audrey, are my leverage. Audrey spat the words like fire. You'll never own him, and you'll never own me. Richard's smirk faltered just as the distant echo of boots thundered outside. The air shifted. Stephen had arrived. The doors crashed open, light flooding the warehouse. Shadows scattered as Stephen's men poured in, weapons drawn. But Stephen himself strode forward unarmed, yet more dangerous than any of them. His gaze locked on Audrey, bound and defiant, and something primal surged in his chest. Richard, he said, voice ablade. Let her go. Richard chuckled, though his eyes flickered with unease. Or what? You'll kill me in front of her. Show her the monster you really are. Stephen stepped closer, every line of him coiled with lethal restraint. The only monster here is the man who touches what isn't his. For a breathless moment, the warehouse crackled with tension. Then Richard shoved Audrey forward, knife flashing at her throat. Her pulse pounded. Stephen's eyes burned fury, fear, love colliding in one devastating force. This was no longer business. This was war. The blade pressed cold against Audrey's throat, a silver crescent that caught the weak light spilling through the warehouse's cracked windows. Richard's arm locked firm around her waist, his smile a cruel echo in the silence. Across the concrete floor, Stephen stood still as stone, every muscle in his body taut with restraint. His men surrounded the perimeter, weapons trained, but none dared to move. One wrong step and Audrey's life would spill red across the floor. Let her go, Stephen said, his voice low, steady, a storm contained. Richard's laughter cut through the air. Always so commanding, Stephen. always the man who thinks the world bows to him. But not today. He pressed the knife closer. Audrey winced, a shallow line of blood bright against her skin. Stephen's jaw clenched. His fists curled at his sides, but his eyes, steel gray, burning, never left hers. If you hurt her, there will be nothing left of you. Audrey's pulse thundered, but she held Stephen's gaze. In his eyes, she saw not the ruthless tycoon or the guarded father, but the man who had held her children's tiny hands, had laughed with her in quiet kitchens, and had broken her heart with silence. "Stephen," she whispered, her voice trembling yet firm. "Don't let him win," Richard sneered. "You think he can save you? He can't even save himself. Did you tell her, Stephen? Did you tell her how you stole her children from her arms? How you let her believe she'd lost them?" The words struck harder than the knife. Audrey froze, her breath torn from her lungs. Her eyes flew to Stephen. His face, raw, unmasked, was answer enough. "You knew," she whispered, agony bleeding through her tone. "You knew they were mine. All these years." Stephen's chest heaved. "I wanted to tell you. I should have told you. But the night they were born, there were threats, enemies waiting for any sign of weakness. If they had known you were their mother, you would have been destroyed. I chose to carry the weight so you could live free." Tears blurred her vision, but anger burned sharper. "Free? You call it freedom, to wake every morning thinking I was empty, to walk this world without my sons." Stephen stepped forward, his voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong." Richard's grin widened, satisfaction gleaming. "Look at that. The great Stephen Hall stripped bare by his own lies. And you, Audrey, just another casualty of his arrogance." Audrey's fury flared fierce enough to sear through her fear. "No, Richard. The only arrogance here is yours. You think breaking people makes you strong, but it only makes you small." She drove her elbow back sharp and sudden, catching him in the ribs. The knife slipped just enough. Stephen surged forward. In a blur, he was there, hand locking around Richard's wrist, wrenching the blade away. Pain twisted across Richard's face, but rage gave him strength. They crashed against the concrete, a brutal symphony of fists and fury. Audrey stumbled free, her breath, ragged ropes falling from her wrists where she had half cut them earlier. Stephen and Richard fought with the weight of years between them. Power, betrayal, ambition, colliding in every strike. "You've always envied me," Stephen spat, shoving Richard back. "And you've always taken what isn't yours." Richard roared, lunging again. The knife skittered across the floor, landing near Audrey's feet. She froze, staring at it, then at Stephen, blood trickling from his lip, eyes blazing with both rage and fear. Without thinking, she kicked the blade toward him. Stephen caught it in one swift motion, pressing it against Richard's throat. Silence fell, broken only by the rasp of ragged breaths. "End it," Richard hissed, daring him. Stephen's chest rose, his grip tightening. For a heartbeat, Audrey feared he would. But then he let the knife fall, its clatter echoing through the warehouse. "No," Stephen said, his voice low but unyielding. "I won't become what you are." Richard's bitter and broken laughter echoed as Stephen's men dragged him away. The fight was over. But inside Audrey, the war had just begun. Stephen turned his eyes, finding her in the dim light. She stood, trembling, wrists raw from rope blood still staining her neck. He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Don't," she whispered. His hand fell, his face tightening. "Audrey, you kept them from me." Her voice cracked, but she forced the words out. Every laugh, every first word, every night they reached for a mother they thought was gone. "You let me live half a life, Stephen." His own pain surfaced, sharp as hers. "I thought I was saving you. I see now all I did was wound us both." Tears streaked her cheeks. "You don't get to decide for me. Not then. Not now. Her words cut deeper than any knife. Stephen bowed his head silent. Daniel approached, carefully glancing between them. The police are on their way. It's over. But Audrey knew it wasn't. Not yet. The boys. Her boys. They didn't know the truth. And when they did, would they hate her for being absent all these years, or love her for finally coming back? The thought fractured her. Later, in the quiet of a black SUV, Audrey sat beside Stephen, the city passing in streaks of neon and shadow. Neither spoke. Her hand rested over the bracelet, its silver cool against her skin, the thread that had tied past to present secret to revelation. Finally, Stephen whispered, "If you never forgive me, I'll understand. But please, don't shut them out. They need you, Audrey. They always have." Her throat burned. "And what about me? Stephen, what do I need?" His answer was a whisper she almost wished she hadn't heard. "Me." Audrey stepped out without looking back when the SUV stopped outside her shop. The night air wrapped cold around her, but the weight in her chest burned hotter than fire. She saw her sketches scattered from the abduction, through the glass pages curling at the edges. She bent, gathering them, her hands trembling. One sketch caught her eye. The ring she had designed for the competition, 2 hands clasped eternally. She stared at it, her vision blurring. Could she ever hold him again? She didn't know. But as the city hummed outside and her heart ached inside, one truth echoed louder than all others. Love and betrayal had become the same blade, cutting her deeper with every heartbeat. And the wound was far from healed. The days after the warehouse felt like walking through smoke, every step uncertain, every breath laced with fire residue. Audrey returned to her bookstore, but the walls no longer felt like a sanctuary. The silence was too loud, the shadows too long. And yet, it was not fear that consumed her. It was the memory of Ethan's sleepy whisper, "Mommy." That word no longer haunted her. It claimed her. When she finally saw the twins again, they came running into her arms with the innocence only children could carry. Ethan's laugh burst like sunlight, and Mason clung tight like she might vanish if he let go. Stephen stood a few paces back, silent, watching with eyes that held longing and regret. Audrey stroked their hair, her heart trembling. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly, pulling back just enough to meet their eyes. The boys stilled, sensing the seriousness. "I wasn't just someone who cared for you. I'm your mother. I always was." Their faces shifted, confusion, shock, then a dawning recognition. We knew," Mason whispered, tears filling his eyes. "We felt it." Ethan nodded fiercely. "You were always our mom. We just had to wait for you to say it." Audrey's tears spilled freely as she hugged them close, her heart finally whole in a way it had never been. Over their heads, her gaze flicked to Stephen. His lips parted, his expression breaking not with pride but with humbled awe. The following weeks unfolded like a fragile bridge between brokenness and healing. Stephen no longer hid behind half-truths. He laid everything bare the night at the hospital, the threats that had haunted him, the desperate decision he had made to protect her. "I thought I was giving you safety," he confessed one evening, voice hoarse. "But all I gave you was emptiness. I will never forgive myself for stealing those years. But if you let me, Audrey, I'll spend the rest of my life giving them back." Her heart, though scarred, softened. She saw not the titan of industry, not the man who had lied, but the father who had carried 2 infants through nights of fever, fought every enemy for their survival, and now stood stripped of pride, begging not for power, but for a chance at love. It wasn't forgiveness all at once. It was forgiveness in fragments, in small smiles, shared dinners, and the sound of the boys' laughter filling the spaces between them. Then came the night under the stars. Central Park lay quiet. the city lights shimmering like jewels scattered on a velvet sky. Audrey walked the path beside Stephen, their hands brushing occasionally, their silence heavy with anticipation. At the fountain's edge, he stopped. "Do you remember the ring you designed in Chicago?" he asked. She blinked, the clasped hands. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a velvet box. Inside lay her design, but transformed. The sapphires glimmered like captured night, the hands meeting in a circle of eternity, polished to perfection. Her breath caught. "I had it made," he said, voice low. "Because it wasn't just a design, it was us. Two people reaching through shadows, finding each other, despite the broken pieces. Audrey Wright, you are the mother of my children, the heart. I thought I'd lost the light I never deserved. Will you marry me?" The world blurred with tears. For a heartbeat, she saw every wound, every lie, every night of loneliness. But she also saw Ethan's smile, Mason's arms, and the warmth of family, rebuilt not by perfection, but courage. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, steadier. "Yes." The twins burst from behind a tree where Daniel had clearly hidden them, cheering so loudly that passers-by laughed and clapped without knowing why. Stephen slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling. And when their lips met, it was not the kiss of two lovers beginning. It was the kiss of two souls returning home. The wedding came weeks later. Central Park bloomed under autumn's touch, golden leaves drifting like confetti across the air. Audrey walked the aisle in a gown that shimmered with understated grace, her curls crowned with delicate pearls. The twins carried the rings, their small suits too big, their smiles wide enough to break hearts. Stephen waited at the altar with no mask or shadow, only a man stripped of power, clothed in love. When vows were spoken, there was no grandeur, no scripted perfection, only truth. "I promise," Stephen said, his voice unsteady, "to never hide behind silence again. To love you in the open every day, every hour. To stand not above you, not before you, but beside you always." Audrey's hand trembled in his, but her eyes were steady. "And I promise," she whispered, "to choose us, not just the life we've built, but the light we carry through the dark. Because love is not about avoiding wounds, it's about healing them together." The kiss sealed their vows and their years of brokenness into something whole. Applause thundered, the boys cheered, and the world felt right for the first time in a long time. Stephen held Audrey close on the dance floor as the city lights rose that evening. The boys spun in circles nearby, laughter painting the night. "Do you ever wonder," she murmured against his chest, "if things had been different? If we'd known sooner?" His lips brushed her hair. "Sometimes. But then I look at you at them, and I think, maybe this was the only path that could have led us here." She closed her eyes, letting the truth settle. They had been broken, yes, but now they were something more substantial, whole, scarred, and beautiful. The final toast was made, the night winding down, the family walking together beneath the canopy of stars. Audrey glanced at the twins, Stephen and the ring glimmering on her hand, and for the first time in years, her heart whispered not of fear, but of peace. They had chosen the light. Together. The story of Stephen Hall and Audrey Wright closes with a perfect ending. But the journey of love, family, and the trials lurking in the shadows has never honestly stopped. If you want to keep following stories filled with intense drama, shocking twists, and heart-melting happy endings, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any upcoming episodes. Love is a choice, and sometimes that very choice writes the story of a lifetime.